All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me. And if you have any questions as we go along, please add them to the chat or question box, and I'll do my best to address them as we go along. Or if I'm about to cover the subject, I'd be happy to. My name's Dave Harivnak. I'm a PE who retired after 34 years at Eastman Chemical Company. And I've always been interested in sustainability. My first home was a passive solar earth-bermed home built into a hillside. And in 2008, when gasoline prices hit $4 a gallon for the first time, I turned my Chevy Avalanche into a plug-in hybrid, which led to a new project where I converted a Jeep for a friend into all electric drive. And this is where I really learned about the possibility of lithium ion batteries and the power of electric drive. Our latest house is well insulated, passive solar, and we've got rooftop solar that powers not only the house, but the cars as well. I was a scout leader for more than 20 years as my children were growing up. And for the past 14 years, I've been a mentor with the FIRST Robotics program. And so proud of the team this year that won a regional, finished second in a second regional, and went to Worlds and even competed in the finals. All right. Why do I think we need to make a difference? When you look at our standard of living today, it's hard to imagine that fossil fuel use and rising fossil fuel use hasn't been a big part of that rise in standard of living. Basically, we in the United States, if you look at the energy that we each consume each and every day, it's like we have about 100 serfs at our beck and call. You know, serf, cook me dinner. Serf, get me a warm bath. Serf, take me to work. Bring me home. And of course, we aren't using people for that, but we're using fossil fuels to multiply all of our efforts and to make our lives far more comfortable. And when you think about it, if you're a middle-class American, you're probably living a lifestyle that kings and queens could only dream about just 200 years ago. But as we look throughout the world, there's no such thing as a wealthy, rich, well-to-do country that uses a low amount of energy. We all use energy. But we've also come to find that that use of energy is causing a problem, as burning all that carbon that's been stored in buried inside the earth is causing CO2 to rise, and that CO2 is trapping heat absorbing gases, causing our planet to warm and causing storms to be more challenging. So scientists have said we need to reduce emissions at least 80% to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And some of them are now on record for saying we have to cut 100%. So if we could take a little poll here or put into the chat, how many of you envision a life like this if we had to live without fossil fuels? Hello? Just put into the chat if this is how you envision a world without fossil fuels. Okay, good. All right. Right. Never going to happen anyways. And I will agree with you. We're not going to give up our lifestyle. I can't imagine that at all. So the reason I say we all have to be involved is if we're truly going to make a significant cut in fossil fuel use or emissions, there's no way that can happen without it affecting all of us. Because directly, we through heating, cooling our homes, and powering our vehicles to and from work, we're responsible for about 80 or 40% of the emissions of the United States. And when you think about it, probably a good bit of the industrial, commercial buildings, and agriculture is there to support us as well. So if we make such a drastic change, it's going to affect all of us. And when we look at the average US household, the average person or the average household is putting out 21 tons of emissions each and every year. To give you another example of that, if you think about the trash that we cart off to the landfill, basically every year, for the average household, that's about 1 ton. So for every ton we're putting in the landfill, the average household is putting 21 tons into our atmosphere. A large part of that is electricity and or natural gas for heating, and then gasoline and its assorted refining. So I truly thought I was in pretty good shape because I spent a lot of time trying to design and build my homes so I would be very energy efficient. And when I built my home, as you likely know, the sun actually rises slightly north of due east and then sets north of due west in June, when the sun is also very high in the sky. And then in December, the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest, with that sun being far lower in the horizon. And so I use this as I designed my house so that most of the windows are on the south side and the overhangs are such that the winter sun can penetrate deeply into the home, but the summer sun is basically shaded by the overhangs so that my windows are basically shaded summer long. And I also did this from a top view of the house as well, kind of with the layout of the house and the garage, so that in the summertime when the sun rises, my patio's in the shade, and likewise late in the evening when the sun's kind of behind the house, our patio is in the shade. But in the wintertime, from sunrise to sunset, we're in the sun. And to give you an idea of how that works, here was a day earlier this year when about 11 o'clock in the morning, it's 33 degrees outside. The temperature of the thermostat was set to 69, but the house was a little warmer at 72, showing that we were pulling in that extra sunlight. To give an idea of what this really looks like in person, here's what the house looks like in December and January, where the sun comes in deeply, even past these pocket doors. In November and February, the sun's coming in still fairly deep, but it's not quite reaching the backside of those pocket doors. In September and March, it's coming in, but basically just hitting that first 3 feet of tile floor. April and August, that sun's barely coming in. And in June and July, you can see by the shadow out here, there's basically no sun hitting the glass during those summer 2 months. Now, this is in comparison to my neighbor right across the street, who in the late afternoon, that sun is just streaming through all their windows. And basically, if you do a heat loss calculation or a heat gain calculation, it's like he's running a little space heater for each and one of his windows of that extra heat that's coming into the house, meaning his air conditioner needs to work extra hard. I tried to build a very energy efficient envelope using insulated concrete forms. These are almost like big Lego blocks that are 4 foot wide, 16 inches tall, and a foot thick. And they actually have nubs on the top and on the bottom so that they snap together very similar to Legos. And then as you're building the wall, you throw in horizontal and vertical rebar. And then once you get that wall completed, you fill that wall with solid concrete. Basically, this makes for a very well-insulated wall, about an R40 if you're comparing it to a wood and fiberglass insulation wall, and very airtight. Virtually no air is going to be leaking around through the concrete and through that styrofoam. For a roofing system, we used structural insulated panels, sometimes called SIPs. And imagine a sheet of plywood that's 4 foot wide and 15 foot long, laminated to 8 inches of styrofoam, laminated to another sheet of plywood that is 4 foot wide and 15 foot long. And this again makes for a very well insulated roof with no air gaps or no air leakage. And to give you an idea of what this really looks like, on kind of a winter day when we had some light snow and temperatures were right around freezing, as you can see, the roof surface is very uniform. You don't see any of that snow melting off. But my poor neighbor across the street, you can see a lot of bare areas on his roof where the heat from the house is escaping up and melting the snow of the roof. And anytime you see holes on your roof like that, you're basically sending money out through the roof of your house. So as a good engineer, I tried to do an analysis comparing our house to other houses and found out that our energy savings were about 60% that of friends and neighbors' homes. So the home was doing a good job. So imagine, to my dismay, back in 2009, when I actually sat down and calculated my own personal carbon footprint, I wasn't below average. I wasn't even average. We were actually above average, with our family emitting about 22 tons a year. And when I did a pie analysis of that, I found out our biggest offender was our gasoline use. So the first thing I did was dig into electric vehicles. And here you can see the 22 tons of emissions that we were putting out each and every year back in the early 2000s. For transportation, back in 2009, we were driving about 25,000 miles a year. The Chevy Avalanche, which is kind of similar to like a Chevy Silverado, a Ford F-250 crew cab, was getting 16.4 miles per gallon. We used that for all the trips for the family and for scouts. And that was responsible for about 10 tons of emissions, with another 4.5 tons from the slightly more efficient Geo Prism, kind of like it replaced the Chevy Nova or a Toyota Corolla that back in the day was getting 28.5 miles a gallon. And when I sat down and figured out the fuel costs, we were spending about $3,600 a year to keep those cars running. And I truly believe electric cars are significantly better. The first EV I ended up getting was a used Tesla Roadster. I got it in 2010, telling my wife that it was the most energy efficient car I was able to find. And when you look at the fuel efficiency, it was rated at 119 miles per gallon equivalent, better than double the best-in-class Toyota Prius. EPA fuel costs, again, the Roadster was less than half the best-in-class Toyota Prius, and about 1/6 the cost that of a Chevy Corvette. And the big thing to me at the time was the emissions per mile. They were about a good 20% below the best-in-class Toyota Prius. Now, back in 2010, when I first did this analysis, AEP in our area, 73% of their electricity came from coal. This has now dropped to less than 40%, and so this CO2 per mile is now 0.3 pounds per mile. So now an EV, or like a Tesla Roadster, is 40% better than the best-in-class Toyota Prius. And the reason I say electric cars are just better is they're also a blast to drive. They accelerate like crazy with absolutely no delay. You touch the accelerator, they jump off the line. And back around 2011, 2012, I tested this myself by going up to the Bristol Dragway, where they have something called street fights, where you can pay, I believe it's $10 for unlimited runs down the drag strip. And that night I lined up against 3 different Corvettes, a Shelby Mustang, and a sport BMW, and watched them all in the rearview mirror, as none of them was able to beat me off the line or catch me in the quarter mile. And also because the batteries are low in the car and centered between the wheels, the handling is very good. And I proved this at a number of autocrosses as well. And so from a handling point of view, an EV will outhandle virtually any gas car due to that extremely low center of gravity. And again, compared to a Toyota Prius, there's no comparison at all. And the reason why electric vehicles are so much more efficient, when you look at a gasoline-powered car, about 80% of that energy in that gasoline in the tank is lost. Most of that to heat losses out the exhaust, through the radiator, through the engine. You've got some parasitic and drivetrain losses, but only about 20% of that energy in the tank actually goes to moving your car forward, where an EV turns that on its end, where over 80% of that energy in the battery goes to moving the car forward. And you also have this nice energy recapture from regenerative brakings. And I'll talk about that in a little bit longer. I truly believe electric vehicles are cheaper in the long term, as they have far fewer moving parts. That Roadster has only 17 moving parts in the entire drivetrain. There's no exhaust or catalytic converter. Brakes last longer due to regeneration. Basically, you take your foot off the accelerator and your motor turns into a generator, slowing your car down and putting additional charge into your battery. Around here, one of our highest mountains, Roan Mountain, I can be at the top of Roan Mountain and I can add basically about 17 miles and never touch the friction brakes coming down that mountain. And there's not a gas car around that's going to add, let's say a half gallon of gas on your way down a mountain. Again, there's no oil changes, no pressurized cooling, no transmission. Again, if there's any questions, put that in the notes or chat. There's no transmission. Basically, the vast majority of EVs are a single speed car, and even reverse, they just reverse the electric field. So you don't need any gearing to go in reverse. There's no belts, no tune-ups, no air filters, alternators, fuel filters, or injectors. And so I have found over the last Let me see here. It's been 15 years of driving an EV now that they truly are lower cost to maintain. So by just changing our transportation, um, we were able to drop our emissions from 7% above average to 40% below average. We're actually driving more miles right now, but we're emitting far less emissions. Um, Tesla Model 3 is rated at 128 miles a gallon, and that's our main trip car. And we got a RAV4 Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid that I'll talk on here in just a minute. Oh, and the nice thing after going through this, we're saving about $2,550 in fuel savings. Yes, we still have to pay for electricity, but electricity is far cheaper for us than buying gasoline. The Toyota RAV4 Prime, quote, the wife's car, um, it's fully electric for about 42 miles. And then after 40 miles, it'll switch into hybrid mode, as I call it, as it's got a range extending gas motor. And the main reason we have this is our one big emission that I haven't figured out to completely eliminate is we love camping and touring the national, especially national parks and national forests here in the United States and Canada. And here we are out in Idaho in a national forest in the Sawtooth Mountains. And most of the national parks and national forests don't have any electricity. So having that ability to use gas gives us that freedom. But if the campsite does have electricity, then at least while we're in the area and for a lot of our day trips, we can actually do that on electric drive and not have to burn any gas. This especially works well in the Canadian national parks, which have great charging. And for most of our long trips, when we're not towing, we use the Model 3. People ask about charging, and all these red dots here are current Tesla superchargers. These couple little question marks you see, that's where they have permitting and they're planning to extend them. It's easy to go a good 250 miles in a Tesla Model 3. So kind of even centered in North Dakota there, with that 250-mile radius, puts me in with more than 20 different charging stations. So getting around pretty much anywhere in the country has not been an issue. And personally, we've been to Cleveland, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head, Tylertown, Mississippi, Houston, Texas, Indianapolis, all without any drama or issues. Charging is actually quite fast. As you can see, here is a charging stop. Most of those superchargers are now 250 kilowatt superchargers where you can charge at over 1,100 miles per hour. As you can see in this particular trip, I had plugged in at a relatively lower state of charge. It says just 5 minutes to continue on the trip and 30 minutes till I reach a full, in this case, it's a 90% or 85% charge limit. And that's usually just about enough time to get a fast food lunch and or dinner. Any questions we have there? I see something here in the chat. Yes, the question is, the insurance can be higher. In my particular case, I think I spend, I just had to renew insurance. It was $700 a year for the Model 3, and that RAV4 Prime was $550. So it is more, but at $150 a year, it wasn't exceedingly more. And that BMS and the temperature control system, that comes with a 8-year and 120,000-mile warranty. My last Model 3 at 130,000 miles didn't have any issues at all. Anyways, here's a 60-second commercial that I want to play. Let me know if this comes along. But after you've driven electric for a while, I think this kind of captures the sentiment quite well. Oops. Looks like this isn't, I forgot to test this here. Oh, there it is.
Then again, what if everything didn't? 100% electric, zero gas Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet, innovation for all.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that little diversion. My son has a Nissan Leaf who's now currently living with us. And we also had a Chevy Volt. We used that to tow initially before we had the RAV4 Prime. But anyways, now that with the electric vehicles, and we're down to 13 tons of emissions, I redid my personal pie chart, and now you see electricity is the biggest opportunity for improvement. So I decided to look into solar. And a slight diversion here, solar is literally going through the roof. In the United States, we're now at about 220 gigawatts of solar generating capacity. And as you can see, it's growing quite rapidly. And but when you compare us to the rest of the world, here's the rest of the world, we're a very small player as the world is moving to install solar at a far faster rate. This is a little bit of a dated chart, but I wanted to show it for a couple reasons. And it was generated back in 2014 by the Solar Industry Institute, who you would think if anyone would be on the the growth of solar, it would be them, and they would be clued into it. Well, in 2014, they were anticipating that in 2019, the world will probably install 67 gigawatts of solar. And while we in the United States invented solar back in 2014, we had only installed 18 gigawatts, with Japan, China, Germany, and even Italy installing more solar than we have in the United States. Well, in 2017, 2 years earlier, the world broke that estimated 67 gigawatts of solar by installing 85 gigawatts of solar. And in 2019, the world installed 114 gigawatts of solar. Last year, the United States installed 40 gigawatts, but that was dwarfed by the 276 gigawatts installed by China. India had a slow year last year and only installed 24 gigawatts. But as you can see, the third world is also a big part of this massive solar increase. In 2016, India built the world's largest solar plant at 640 megawatts. Basically, that's about the size of an average coal-fired power plant here in the United States. But this solar farm was built in 8 months at a cost of $680 million. That same size coal fire plant would be about $3.4 billion, according to the EIA. In 2017, China then broke that record with an 850 megawatt plant in one of their western deserts. And I think this is a real use the dam at night. Then in 2018-19, India built a 2 gigawatt solar system, which was broken again in India in 2021 with a 2.2 gigawatt system. And now last year, China just unleashed a 5 megawatt solar park in the deserts of China. So we added solar to our house. And as somebody noted, we put the solar in some 12 years ago. And 12 years ago, solar was just getting started, and Tennessee had virtually no codes that applied to solar. So if we were putting the solar in today, we'd have to go with smaller panels or kind of put them in landscape mode, because we couldn't go all the way to the roof peak here. We've got to leave 18 inches now, and we got to leave a full 3-foot walkway on the side. We are grid tied. Our local utility allows net metering. So basically, on a nice sunny day like we're having right now, our meter's essentially running backwards, and we're putting power onto the grid that we get to use later on. Again, this is an older system. Today, if this was being put in, we would have 1 inverter rather than 2. I got a 3 gigawatt and a 3 kilowatt and a 4 kilowatt inverter. And then because I've got 2 inverters, we have to come together into a combiner box before we go into our electric panel. So on a newer system, we would probably replace this with a single 7.6 gigawatt or kilowatt inverter, and then we could get away with the combiner box as well. We did later add batteries. Basically, I am selling and installing solar systems, or mostly doing the engineering for the solar systems. And so I really wanted to have some practical experience with batteries, which came in handy during Hurricane Helene, where the house basically, my son never even noticed we lost power, and the house just kept on trucking on. People ask if solar works in the wintertime, and the short answer is yes. You do have less generation, mainly due to the lower sun and the higher angle, or shorter days. But even when it snows, because of the dark surface and the slope surface, basically snow, that's the last place snow will lay is on a solar panel, and it's the first place it's going to melt off of. Oh, and for this picture here, I hadn't added the garage panels. That was a little bit later of an expansion. As I said, personally, we use more electricity in the winter than we do in the spring and fall. And we have a little bit of a summertime peak here with air conditioning, but I will build somewhere between 1,500 and 2,200 kilowatt hours of credits during the spring, fall, and summer. And then I can use that shortfall to power me through the winter. Let's see, it looks like I got a question here. Oh, sorry, not playing. Did that video, I take it you didn't hear it? Okay. But here's a picture of my electric bill when people ask me, does solar pay? Yes, I did pay 21,000. So that's not an insignificant amount of price to pay for solar. And that is with a tax credit, fortunately. It would have been about 30,000 without the tax credit. But as you zoom in, our electric bill, for the most part, is a very consistent $20 a month. And if you look into the detail that the power company gives me, like for this particular month, I used 450 kilowatt of energy from the grid, but I gave the grid 778. So for a net usage of negative 328 kilowatt hours that month that I sent to them. And if you look at my history, I used 0 in July, 0 in June, and 0 the previous year. And the total usage for the past 12 months was 0. As a matter of fact, there's been several years where we've generated more power than we've used. And that basically just ends up being a donation to the power company. And remember, that includes about 1,400 miles of driving in our EVs each month. So again, solar wasn't free, but how much do you pay for your electric bill and 4 tanks of gas? And for us, it was about year 7 is when we broke even. And then we were able to now have 5 years of basically no cost power and energy. So with solar production, we've now gone from 8% or 7% above average to we're now 70% below average, and another 6 tons of emissions were eliminated. All of a sudden, I began to realize that that 80% goal we were trying to achieve was not only achievable, but in many ways desirable. So let's not forget about the many little things that we did over the years as well. When it comes to appliances, we used Energy Star appliances. And so they may cost a little bit more up front, but I'm looking at the long-term cost of what not only is the cost of that appliance, but how much energy it'll use. This is a handy little meter if you want to get something to kind of measure your own usage. It's a kilowatt meter, and you can plug it in to see how much energy your TV's using, lights are using. A couple years ago, my wife got some LED Christmas lights, and I plugged in a string of our old Christmas lights, and it was 58 watts. The LED bulbs were 7 watts. It's kind of like, okay, let's get rid of all those old Christmas lights. And of course, there's been an incredible revolution in LED lighting. Again, trying to get to that total cost of ownership, which bulb is the cheapest? Yes, an incandescent bulb is typically cheaper than a compact fluorescent or an LED light bulb. But when you realize that LED bulb typically would last far longer than an incandescent light bulb, and more importantly, that LED bulb at about 7.5 watts of power versus 60 watts in the incandescent, if you kind of figure out the electricity cost, how much it would cost to run, you all of a sudden see that cheap incandescent light bulb is actually quite expensive. Usually when we change something out, we'll donate it to Habitat, but when we got rid of and upgraded all of our lights, we basically trashed them. There's no way I was going to saddle other people with those high costs of power. And here's another use of lighting. Let's assume that the average house has got about 30 light bulbs. they're on about 4 hours a day. By swapping out to an LED, you'd save 51 watts. So that would be about 184 kilowatt hours a month. Save you almost about $24 if you have average power rates, or that's enough power savings to drive an EV 612 miles. No panel upgrades, no electrical upgrades, basically just changing out your light bulbs, and then you're able to partially power a car, a second car for many households. Another neat thing we found is a heat pump water heater. It's a standard water heater from here on down, and then it's got a little heat pump that sits on top. They're about double the price of a regular electric water heater, so figure on spending about $800 more. Fortunately, there is an energy tax credit that takes some of that bite out. But what drove me to it is the annual energy costs are 1/4 that of an electric water heater. So in our particular case, after some 20 or 19 years of use, we replaced our water heater. I was figuring on a 2-year payback to cover that cost of the water heater. And again, that's enough power to drive an EV some 10,000 miles a year. So that could be your main car all of a sudden, barring a few trips. We also upgraded virtually all of our yard tools. We got a battery-powered lawnmower, battery-powered blower, battery-powered chainsaw, and weed eater. And now we don't have to worry about getting those, putting stabilizer in the gas and having to get them tuned up every spring. So overall, we've now managed to go from about 7% above average to 81% below average. Over 18 tons of CO2 are being averted by us each and every year, and we're saving around $3,400 a year in gasoline and electricity savings. And so not only did we find out that 80% was possible, we started to realize that in many ways, it's a better lifestyle. I want to also say that progress isn't always consistent. Here's the average household. Here was us back in 2009. And while we generally went down, we had some years where we backslid, had to expand solar panels, because of another car or something of that nature. But generally, we have been going down. So somewhere around 2015, I posted in the Tesla Motor Forum, do you use solar to power your car? And much to my surprise, I found out that over 60% of the people had already made the jump to solar and are powering their homes and their vehicles with solar, and another 24% were planning on it. And so I got this idea that maybe I should develop or write a book that highlighted people across the US and Canada to kind of show them what a lifestyle is, a low carbon lifestyle can really be. So here I'm just going to highlight 5 of those additional chapters in the book. And the first one is Mark Bishop out of Clinton, Tennessee. This is an electric motorcycle that Mark found, and he rebuilt the battery pack, and he's got a good 100-mile range now on his EV motorcycle. And you can see his first phase of the solar array on his workshop behind him. They've got a rather traditional looking house. That workshop garage is kind of off to the left side there of the house. It doesn't show in this picture. And this John Deere tractor is one of his few gas or fueled vehicles that he still has. But as he built the house, or They're currently at about 77% less emissions than their neighbors. And actually, he's now improved that. He's probably 100% less because since the book, he doubled the solar on his barn. So he's now net negative as far as power generation. Their home is 3,300 square feet. They use a geothermal heat pump for very efficient heating. They use an air-to-air ventilation. Like I say, here's a 10 kilowatt solar system. And then a couple years after this shot, this upper part of the garage, they put another 10 kilowatts of solar. So they now have 20 kilowatts of solar, which allows them to produce more energy than their house and their vehicles use. The wife has a 2015 Tesla Model S that they still use for their trips. This is a Honda Insight that Mark had converted to all-electric drive, and he still has the Insight, but he also purchased a Tesla Model 3. That's his EV bike, and that's his electric lawnmower. At the time of the book, their annual energy costs were about $300, or about 5% that of their neighbors. And again, since he expanded his solar system up here, his annual energy costs are even below that. Matter of fact, I think he's positive because he's under an older TVA program where they were paying him for the power he produces. They no longer have that in the TVA land, but he actually makes money on his solar system. Another family were the Spectors up in New Jersey. They built a passive solar, earth-burned home, and it's kind of hard to see, but up here is a row of solar panels. You can see some solar panels here on the guest house or mother-in-law house, and they have solar panels up on this part of the roof as well. So their emissions are about 95% less than the typical American family. Kind of like my house, they have the passive solar design so that the sun comes in deeply during the winter, but in the summer when the sun is higher, they will not get as much sun into the house. And built into the hillside with dirt on the north side of the house helps keep that house comfortable even in the wintertime, because now instead of 10-degree outside air, you've got 50-degree tempered earth. As I said, he uses solar PV, passive solar, earth berming. This first room here is basically a sunroom. It's not heated or cooled. And let me see, here's a picture of that sunroom, but it makes it very comfortable in the summertime. They'll open up the windows so there's breezes and ventilation through there. And then in the wintertime, in the fall, late fall, early spring, this room is comfortable again to be out in. And even in the middle of winter, it may be 50 degrees in here, where the outside temperature could be 20 or 10 degrees. So again, it helps moderate the house. Their annual energy costs are about $1,200 a year, down about 75%. Different utilities and different prices of gasoline do change. They use a Chevy Bolt that's got a good 240 miles of range that I believe they're still using today. My third example is David Erb. He's a mechanical engineer. He actually has his PhD in mechanical engineering, lives in Asheville, and teaches at West Carolina University. And here he is in a converted Porsche, converted Porsche that a student team converted to all electric drive. So he was taking it around to make sure that the car was good and safe. But he liked working with student teams on EV conversions or solar projects with the students. This is their house. Their emissions are about 97% less than a typical American household. And he did this with basically, has a smaller house at 1,200 square feet. He's got a ground source heat pump and a heat pump water heater. And so with very energy efficient heating and very energy efficient hot water, and they upgraded the windows and added insulation, their house doesn't use much electricity. And so a little 7 kilowatt solar system basically is enough to power their house and their electric car. And their first EV was a Nissan Leaf, and they had a Honda Civic for longer trips. And they've since upgraded their Honda Civic and the Leaf, and they now have a single car, a Tesla Model 3, similar to mine. Their annual energy costs are again down 96%. Very impressive for the area. Our fourth case study takes us out to California to Peter Norby. He's an engineer who built a passive solar house, and he really likes electric BMWs. He went through a real detailed analysis. Their net emissions reduction were 120% less than the typical American family. And I'll show you the trick he used to go negative there. But he did an analysis of, he has 2 gasoline cars and home fuel versus 2 BMW i3s and powering his house with solar. So if you have 2 gas cars at 20,000 miles a year at 26 miles per gallon, he basically figures that you're going to spend over a 25-year period $140,000 worth of fuel. Likewise, with 2 BMW i3s, these are all electric cars, smaller efficient ones. A 4 kilowatt solar system would cost about $6,000 one time. So the first year cost is $12,000, but the 25-year cost is also $12,000, saving a significant amount of fuel costs over the 25-year life he's using for the solar system. And by the way, solar systems should last well past 30 years. For his home, if he were to use power from the grid at 25 cents per kilowatt hour, that would be about $2,000 a year. Or to generate that same 8,000 kilowatt hours, he could do that with a 6 kilowatt solar system. I'm generous. They get a little bit more sun in California than we do here in Tennessee. But basically that first year cost and even a 25 cost is right there at 25,000 or at $18,000 versus if he was buying the power from the grid, he figures just to heat and cool the house would be over 100,000. So over 25 years, he figures he's saving over $200,000 in energy costs. And as he says, when you save a lot of money in energy costs, you can splurge a little bit. And here's his BMW i8 that they have. He says it's a blast to drive. It is a plug-in hybrid, similar to that RAV4 Prime. So it gets close to supercar performance, but better than Prius fuel economy. Their annual energy costs are quite low, especially for California. And how they got to negative is they work with this nonprofit and they donated a solar system to that nonprofit to kind of bring their own personal emissions below zero. All right, getting into the last case study here. And this is Steve Stevens. He's got a doctorate in physics out in Golden, Colorado. and he loves these big wheel bicycles. As a matter of fact, he's ridden these bicycles across the United States. He's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records. It took him like 12 days to go across the country with this vintage bicycle. So when he finally settled down in Golden, Colorado, he found a house and has converted it into these are penny farthing bikes, I do believe, converted it into a museum. And it's called the Golden Olden Recyclery. Again, his net emissions are 130% less than the typical American family. He produces more energy than they use, and they're net exporters on their local grid. He says he doesn't get paid for that extra power, but he wanted to go negative. He says now he actually gets more people coming and touring their place more for the energy efficiency than he does to look at the old bicycles. Their home or museum is 1,600, or the core house is 1,640 square feet, and they've done a number of expansions and upgrades to it. They use solar PV, EVs, passive solar, and a lot of extreme insulation, airlocks, sometimes double airlocks, and buffering. So this is kind of a poor view overhead I was able to get out of Google Earth. And so like to come in to the house here, you actually have 1, 2, 3 airlocks you go through to get into the house. So in the wintertime, none of that warm air from the house is escaping to the outside. These red areas here are where he added cyanic insulation board. And as a general rule, these walls are over an R of 100. He went absolutely crazy in adding extra insulation to a lot of these other walls. And then these expansions he did on the south side are kind of passive solar expansions that aren't heated and cooled directly, but they still stay comfortable throughout most of the year. And to give you an idea, this is what one of those looks like on the outside. Little quirky from the south side, which people typically can't see unless you walk around back, but there's actually a double wall in here. And I'll show you this a little bit more on the next picture. But in the wintertime, you get a lot of sun coming in. And so that heats up in this double wall, comes up, and then that warm air is then pumped into the main part of the house as their main heating system. In the summertime, these little overhangs will help provide some shade, but they'll also open these windows, and then that hot air will come up in this double wall and just vent on out. Dr. Stevens is really good about looking at, he says they've got a local habitat recycling store. And so like a lot of this glass was a local grocery store that upgraded all their doors to, I think, triple pane. And so he got a whole bunch of those glass panes and then kind of built this himself. Now, if you look on the inside, they spent a lot more time making this look very nice inside. This is a conference room that, you know, if people come and tour, they can show. And you can kind of see this is the inside wall, and then there's that double outside wall that, you know, in the summertime, they'll vent that warm air up, but in the wintertime, they'll capture that warm air and duct it into the middle of the house. And here's another kind of airlock that he built. He said he got tired of trudging through the snow from the front of the house to the back of the house. So he added this kind of buffer zone in. So when it's 10 degrees outside, this room here will be a more comfortable 50 degrees, help tempering the house. And you can also see here, if you zoom or look on in closely, where he built out the house. And there's probably an extra 4 inches that he built out And that's an extra 4 inches of insulation he put in, foam insulation, and then put the siding back on. So this is how he kind of added the insulation to the house, giving an R100 because he has the initial wall, and he actually added additional insulation on the inside as well. He too has an electric car, a Model X that he can throw his bicycles into for a trip. So now who thinks that one can live a good middle-class lifestyle with very little or limited fossil fuel use? If you're willing to take a similar journey, I would urge you to maybe to consider your own, where you're burning your own, or what your own carbon footprint is. And that way you can kind of come up with those pie charts to kind of see where you might be able to save both energy and money. So we've got some time here, finished a little early. People have any questions? And I think we have a small enough group that I'm okay if people unmute if they would like to talk and ask the question directly. And there's the cover of my book that's for sale on Amazon. I'll wait here a minute, see if anybody's got a question or comment they would like to make. And or a suggestion on how to make the presentation more relevant. Good question. Living in a multi-story apartment building. So if it's an apartment that you are just renting, you're kind of limited. So not owning a car is great. And if you can take mass transit to work is excellent. If you do own a car, for weekend trips, can it be an EV? Can you work with your apartment where you either have access to even a 110 plug or would they allow you to put in some chargers? So if it's a co-op, you own it, then you might be able to add, if not an outlet. A lot of times I've worked with a couple apartments where they would allow a owner to trench out and put in an EV charging station, or they'll put in some charging stations for the apartment complex as a whole. You can get them where they can even divvy out and charge the power, or if there's like 3 or 4 quote EV people, then you guys get together and maybe cover the cost of putting that in. When it comes time to replace, let's say, a water heater, that's when possibly a heat pump water heater could come in. And then another interesting thing I've seen taking off now in Germany is if you have a south-facing balcony, they'll hang solar panels on their balcony and run that power into their apartment, kind of offsetting part of their power use. So it does get harder if you're in a condo association, but I do know that you can. I am aware that some have made improvements with their condo association. And again, when you go on a trip, it's been a few years, but our last trip to Europe, we ended up deciding not to rent a car at all. And it was an absolute easy and a delight to get around with a train. The mass transit system over there in Europe is just an absolute delight. and ended up being far cheaper than even just the gas, assuming we were able to even find a car. So, there's ways when you're on trips to, just be cognizant of your own footprint and when can you use existing transit. Let's see, I think I got something else here. Yes, can solar be mounted on EDPM roofs? Yes, we've done that. Typically how we do that is we put, most of those are on commercial buildings where we've run across EDPM roofs. And we will use something that's known as a ballasted system. So it's a racking system that sits on top of the roof, and then we tie the solar panels together on this ballasted system. So we have done that on a number of roofs. We've also on one EDPM roof, and it was a sloped roof. And in that particular case, you can get, I know Iron Ridge for one, they have a foot that basically goes into the roof deck, and then you get these EPM and they've got kind of stick on the other side, and you take that off and place it over the foot, and that basically seals it down to make it watertight. So there are ways that you can use this on a EDPM roof, whether that EDPM is flat or sloped. Alrighty. Um, no more open questions. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I will end the presentation. You have a good day.